because there hasn't been a day I've been with the Israeli Defense Forces in the last year and a half when I haven't seen how they've been operating, and then read the world's news the next day and read it as if these were polar opposites of each other. As I say, Israelis enter hospital. Yes, because the hospital was somewhere where there's footage of hostages from the 7th being taken in on the 7th and not for care.
I want to lay some propositions before you. When October 7th made its presence known, the first thing that occurred to me, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, if I have some misapprehension, the terrible hand of Iran is behind Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran has absolutely no compunctions about sacrificing every single Palestinian to the cause in as brutal a fashion as possible to capitalize on the public relations scandal that can be made of that.
Yeah.
They've got no feeling whatsoever for the Palestinians. They're pure cannon fodder in the eternal war against the great Satan and Israel, right? The U.S. and Israel. That seems appropriate?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what the hell? I went to Oxford, and the first bloody thing that those half-wits asked me when I was on stage was if I was happy about this tweet I made on October 8th, which was, "Give them hell, Netanyahu," which I paid quite the price for, let me tell you. And although not so much a price as many people have paid, put it that way. And so what's Israel to do when they're faced with a disposable people, so to speak, that will be sacrificed at a moment's notice by their own leadership, by their own corrupt philosophy, and by the mullahs of Iran? What possible response could Israel have except to roll over and submit?
Well, a lot of people would like them to do that, of course, but that's not an option. There's a famous story that Joe Biden tells. It's actually a good story for Joe Biden. Being Joe Biden, he's told it a lot. But he, when he was a young senator, once met Golda Meir, former prime minister of Israel, indeed the prime minister during 73. And she famously said to Joe Biden when she was showing him around, you forget, Senator Biden, we have a secret weapon. And Biden thought that Golda Meir was going to tell him about Israel's nuclear project. And he was all ears. I said, "What's your secret weapon?" She said, "We have nowhere else to go." So anyone who thinks that rolling over is a possibility for Israel is simply somebody who wants them to be gone. What is clever about Hamas and its backers in Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Government, is that they know exactly how to put Israel in an even more intolerable situation each time they attack. So, for instance, they know that if you kidnap Israelis, one of the absolutely central things of the fabric of Israeli society, as with most Western societies, is you don't allow your citizens to remain behind, just like you don't leave your soldiers behind. That if you fall behind enemy lines, if you are taken behind enemy lines, the state will do everything it can to get you back. And that has been a compact in Israel since the foundation in 48, and a really central thing. So Hamas knew, and I have lots of testimony from people who, for instance, overheard terrorists on the morning as they were lying dead or other things, heard the terrorists at, for instance, the Nova Party debating which of the young girls they should shoot and which they should kidnap. And, there were debates that they might have had too many people, too many girls to take back, for instance. But Hamas did the kidnapping knowing that to have 250 Israelis in captivity is to have an unbelievable advantage over the Israelis, because they're going to have to come in. They're going to try to save them. They're going to try to rescue them.
They'll exchange hundreds of terrorists for single Israelis.
As happened recently, an exchange of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails for committing acts of terrorism, preparing suicide vests, trying to carry out bombings, and much more, knife attacks. They will exchange sometimes hundreds of those Palestinians for, as happened the other week, the coffins of 2 Jewish babies. So,
well, one of the things that's striking about your book is your continued explication of the Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, psychopaths, their willingness to exploit every element of human decency to wage the most destructive possible of war.
Yeah.
So the tunnels, let's go into that for a minute. So Gaza is 11 by 11 miles, approximately 140 square miles, 350 miles of tunnels, longer than the London Underground, which is stunning fact. Stunning fact.
Longer than London Underground, and as I joked to the British military friend, rather better run.
6,000 entrances, many of them in the bedrooms of children.
Almost always where the tunnel entrances come up, they come up in children's bedrooms, in houses throughout Gaza. They come up inside mosques. Well, they come up inside hospitals. In 2014, the BBC acknowledged that the Hamas leadership were coming up from tunnels underneath the Shifa hospital, which is one of their command headquarters. By the way, all of that is, for anyone who cares about this, completely against every law of war. The Geneva Conventions, every convention of war is you are not allowed to fight. You're not meant to fight in civilian clothing. You're not meant to fight and fire from places of worship. You're not meant to stockpile ammunition in hospitals. You're not meant to make civilian homes targets for reasons that our species thought we all understood.
Sufficiently victimized perpetrators have no reason to abide by any standards.
No, and of course,
for an argument.
And of course, militarily, this is all to Hamas's enormous advantage, because again, they know that if there is a stockpile of ammunition or a terrorist or a tunnel entrance or whatever in a civilian home, and even if the Israelis tell all the locals to get out, the world's media will say that Israel bombed or invaded a civilian home.
Mm-hmm. Or a hospital or a place of worship.
There's a member of the Israeli
None of those words have the same meaning
none of them.
In Gaza that they do in the West.
None at all. It's whenever it's reported that, that a hospital has been hit, it's usually reported in the world's press, as Hamas wants, that the Israelis just decided to bomb a hospital, as if they're so evil, these Israelis, that they even bomb hospitals. There was a member of the Israeli war cabinet, Gadi Eisenkot, who I quote in the book because he lost his son fighting in Gaza in the aftermath of October the 7th. And the next day he lost his nephew, also fighting in Gaza. His nephew was killed because, as the Israelis were trying to do this incredibly delicate military operation to get back the hostages, destroy the leadership of Hamas, and minimize any possible civilian casualties. Gadi Eisenkot's nephew was fired upon from a mosque by Hamas terrorists who gleefully opened fire on him and his unit. They were meant to be sticking to Hamas were doing that. The Israelis were trying to stick to the normal laws of conflict and not just destroy the mosque. And so they lost soldiers. This is another example of the way in which Hamas do this. Any normal society that valued the life of their own civilians, like America, Britain, Israel, would, if it knew that its people were going to come under bombardment, often do what the Israelis did in the south and indeed across much of the country, which is you build bomb shelters in every home and you have bomb shelters in every civilian area. And across the south of Israel, that's the case, as it is in the north, because it's been being shelled by Hezbollah for 20 years. Only in Gaza do you get a situation where, and I quote one of the Hamas leaders saying this in an interview with Al Arabiya last year, this Hamas leader was asked by a friendly Arab journalist, why, if you say the civilian casualties in Gaza are so high, why can't you allow the civilians of Gaza to shelter in your tunnel networks that you've built underneath Gaza? And the Hamas leader says, the tunnel system is not for the civilians. The tunnel system is for our fighters and for our weaponry. And the interviewer says, well, who's to look after the civilians? And he says, well, the international community.
Right. Well, that's just testament to the fact that the Palestinians are essentially cannon fodder for the eternal war against Israel and the United States.
Yes, but it's even worse than that, of course, an army that fights by the laws of war, which the IDF does, like the American army, like the British army, makes mistakes for sure, like the American army, like the British army, but that fights by the laws of war. When it encounters a terrorist army like this, the civilized army seeks to minimize the civilian casualties, as the IDF has done, and anyone who claims that it hasn't just does not know what's been going on for the last 18 months.
And believes Hamas reports.
Which
why would anyone ever believe Hamas reports?
Yeah, it's, I mean, why go to a mass murderer to find out their account of their actions, But the point is that when an army like that encounters an army that not just desires death for its enemy, but desires death for the people it purports to govern, and with a kicker in it, seeks death itself. This is a realm of fanaticism and what I call it It's a death cult, a cult that literally worships death. The leadership of Hamas, who I quote in the book, have for decades boasted about the extent to which they love death, embrace death. One of the underlying things in this book, as you know, which we'll come on to doubtless later, but is what happens if a society that actually values life encounters a death cult that worships and glories in death for its foes, but also for itself. We have
suffering and death.
We have seen such movements throughout history. We have seen them, but most of the world has forgotten about them. And I would argue that Israel, to a great extent, forgot about them until 6:30 in the morning on October the 7th, 2023.
Possessed by the spirit of Cain.
Yes. I've seen quite a lot of war and how people act in war, and regard myself as relatively unshockable, or at least aware of the capacity of human evil. But from the moment I started seeing the videos that Hamas took themselves on the morning, and I started seeing them very early, I then saw an awful lot of them, and then far more, even before going to the massacre sites myself, the hospitals and the morgues and so on. But one of the things I could not get out of my head was the glee, the sheer orgiastic glee of the terrorists.
At least the Nazis tried to hide their crimes.
This is a point I've made that has occasionally got me into trouble. What happened on the 7th was as if for some hours in Treblinka, the Nazis had live streamed to the world what they were doing and were proud of it and wanted everyone to know.
And then the universities celebrated it.
I quote a late friend of mine early in the book, as you know, who fled Nazi Germany, Nazi Austria in 1938. And he said towards the end of his life to me and to a historian friend, he said that he had spent his last years thinking, actually, maybe there was a level of anti-Semitism even worse than the Nazis.
Well, hell is a bottomless pit, you know.
Absolutely.
Really.
And it required somebody who had fled Nazism and lost much of his family to Nazism to be able to, in a way, make that point. But the thing, we don't need to get into the competition of, as it were, which is how people see it, but it doesn't diminish anything. But this thing of the ecstasy in death, the ecstasy in bringing death. I quote the young man who phones back to his family in Gaza on a cell phone and says, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. I've killed 10 Jews. Get mother on the phone. Turn on to WhatsApp video. I can show you. The endless cries of Allahu Akbar, which, as I said shortly after the 7th, is not something I wanted to hear chanted on our streets much more, knowing this isn't simply an offering of prayer like the Lord's Prayer. And if Christians had in recent memory been massacring people whilst screaming the Lord's Prayer in ecstasy, I think that Christians would have the decency to pipe down a bit about shouting it in public squares in mass. The cry of Allahu Akbar that we're forever told is simply like, it's just a prayer, like saying Sieg Heil in America is just a quoting of German. The use of Allahu Akbar by the terrorists as they're removing a young man's head with a shovel or raping girls and then killing them. In 2014, there was a relatively minor war in Gaza compared to this one. And there are many soldiers I spoke to who were involved in the relatively minor conflict in 2014 who were also in Gaza since October 2023. They all said that they noticed when they did house-to-house clearing, going through, trying to find hostages, trying to find weapons, trying to find tunnel entrances, and trying to find the architects of the massacre. They all said the same thing, which was that in 10 years, there was a marked radicalization in the households, in the learning materials, in everything from, and it's not satire, math textbooks of, if you kill 2 Jews and kill another 2 Jews, how many dead Jews do you have? This is the way you learn arithmetic in Gaza under Hamas. This is something that many of us noticed and had warned about for years. But the fruit of this education system, the fruit of this indoctrination was October the 7th. And look at it. It was a catastrophe for the Israelis, and it's turned out to be an utter disaster for the citizens of Gaza. There is an answer to the death cults. There is an answer to the cult of death, which the IDF has shown is the destruction of their leaders, the killing of the psychopaths who would lead a society in this way, and a demonstration of the values of your own society. Now, that has been incredibly hard because there hasn't been a day I've been with the Israeli Defense Forces in the last year and a half when I haven't seen how they've been operating, and then read the world's news the next day and read it as if these were polar opposites of each other. As I say, Israelis enter hospital. Yes, because the hospital was somewhere where there's footage of hostages from the 7th being taken in on the 7th and not for care. Whether it's hospitals, schools, anything else, there was just nothing the IDF could do from the moment they went in, indeed from the moment before they went in, when they were not going to be misrepresented by the world's media in a grand way. But, and I've been asked many times in the last year and a half, why are the Israelis so bad at communicating? Truth is, it's extremely hard to communicate what you're doing to a world which in significant part has already decided that you're the bad guy.
And one that's manipulated as well, very profoundly, by the actors behind the scenes. And all the things that we talked about play into this. The refusal of the West to admit to the existence of malevolence, our inability to understand the difference between a just and an unjust war, our willingness to hide in the shibboleth that war is bad, which is hardly a moral claim at all.
War doesn't solve anything.
Right. War, yeah. Well, and you think about how easy it is to make the moral claim, for example. I've heard many people make this claim. I'm against the death of women and children, as if that's some sort of moral claim.
Well,
as if that's not the basis of common humanity. No one can capitalize on that.
Yes.
On that profession of their morality.
Well, and the other one I come across is people, by the way, and they don't really mean it, by the way, because again and again, the people who say that Israel is killing women and children are apologists for at best and supporters for at worst, a group that videoed themselves killing women and children. And many of the people who say that the Israelis, many of the people who say that the Israelis are doing this are the same people who say that Hamas did not. I mean, that's another level of the psychopathy now in the West. It's like I've said repeatedly since the 7th, what did we have in the 2017 period? Believe all women. Turned out, don't believe women if they're Jews. Don't believe it then. Don't believe it if the rape is caught on camera by Hamas and they're boasting of it. Don't believe them. These same people who deny that Hamas raped women on the 7th will say that Israeli soldiers are raping women in Gaza. Every single time it's some form of projection,
well, and that's that last-ditch attempt to what would you say, to salvage the oppressor-victim narrative.
Excuse
that's the core. That's the staff in the center of the belief system.